This is r/DNDStories. Today we're going to look at part 2 of session 6. I realize that's a bit confusing, but like I said before, this video was originally just supposed to be one part, but it ran twice as long, so I had to split it. So if you don't remember what happened, you can check the annotation at the top to watch the previous video and get caught up with where we're at. When the great and powerful goblin threatened us again, Demos turned to me. "Can you believe this guy?" he said, and flicked a dagger at it without even looking. The wet thunk and subsequent thud informed him that he had hit his mark. We gathered up the few valuables, a dagger, and a few other trinkets on the altar, and worked up the courage to check to see if that argument was still going on. Rather than just barging in, we wanted to have some eyes on the inside, as it were. Demos waved his hands up the length of his body, and in a shimmering burst, transformed into a goblin. While we hid out of sight, he carefully entered the room. Hey boss, I was, The bugbear turned to him, his face clenched in sheer rage. "What the heck do you want? Did I tell you to bother me?" He was clutching a man by the collar of his shirt, a dwarf, bloodied and beaten to the brink of death. We had found our client, Gundren Rockseeker. "Didn't you hear me? Get out!" the bugbear screamed, and with his other hand grabbed a morning star. Being quite fond of his skull, Demos scampered back and slammed the door shut. Having seen a few windows inside, he sent Ying back outside and had him circle around to the exterior of the room. Once the raven was in place, he shed his disguise and took a deep breath. As he exhaled, his eyes glazed over a deep, glistening black. He was using his familiar senses. Though blinded and deafened, we could still try and communicate with him in the form of touch, patting his shoulder reassuringly. The screaming continued as Groll, the bugbear who ruled these ruins, shook Gundren violently as he demanded to know who else knows about it. Was he talking about the map? Why was it so important to him? The source of the other voice, a drow, leaned against a nearby wall, intermittently checking her fingernails. She didn't seem to care whether Gundren died or not, since they already relieved him of his map. The map in question was of Wave Echo Cave, an ancient mine discovered by a coalition of gnomes and dwarves. The riches were so vast they formed Phandelver's Pact, by which they would have an equal share to the wealth found there. It was also the home of an artifact known as the Forge of Spells, where the artisans crafted magical items of untold power. But from the north came a terrible horde of orcs, and, with the help of mercenary wizards, they tried to claim Wave Echo Cave as their own. The craftsmen fought bravely against their attackers, but ultimately failed, and much of the mines were destroyed. After that, no one knew where to find it again, until now, it seems. "This is bad," said Demos. "At this rate, they're going to kill him unless we get in there and do something." He shook his head and regained his senses. A sly grin stretched across his face. "I have an idea." As Groll shook Gundren about like a rag doll, a voice rang out from outside the windows. "Who knows about the map? Who knows about the map?" It was Ying, using his voice mimicry to draw their attention away from the door. They ran over to the windows, searching desperately for whoever was making all that racket. When we burst in, I fired an enchanted arrow at Groll, but my aim was off. He managed to deflect the shot, and that's when I noticed his pet, a large gray wolf sitting in the corner of the room, snarling and baring its fangs. "Snarl! Rip him apart!" cried Groll as he raised his morning star and charged us. I jumped onto the nearby table as the others filed into the room. Before Taco could enter, however, the hobgoblins from earlier heard the commotion and came running down the hall. While she held them off, Valanthia entered and hurled a ball of flame at Groll, scorching his fur. He howled and rushed her, and Demos ducked under his swing. I was readying another arrow when the drow ran up and brought her fist down on my right foot. I yelped in pain and hopped back, nearly falling off the table as I clutched at my foot. Demos sprinted forward and tried to perform an action slide across the tabletop. I guess he forgot that I was currently standing on one leg on that very same table. He jumped and slid across the table, bowling my leg out from under me and sending me flat on my back onto the table, while he crashed onto the floor on the other side. He actually got enough distance to smack into the drow, sending her back against the wall. Demos managed to stagger to his feet and was about to strike when he stopped dead in his tracks. In what may very well have been slow motion, he gazed longingly into her purple eyes, Clearly infatuated with this toe-crunching femme fatale. Okay, sure. His hands were sweaty, something about his mother's cooking and all that. But being a rogue, I don't believe he had any living parents. Does this become a rom-com all of a sudden? This is the meet cute? She was fast. Too fast for him to react. Her fist slammed into his face, sending him toppling back onto the floor. I spun back onto my feet and slashed at her, striking her in the arm. My enchanted blade sent vines spiraling up around her. Try as she might, she was stuck fast. Grell was keeping Snarl busy, clawing at him and trying to avoid the wolf's jaws. Since his wolf was otherwise engaged, Groll turned to face me and, BAM! Brought his Morning Star down on my other foot. Why the freak was everyone breaking my feet? I screamed and hopped back and forth, thankful none of the spikes hit their mark. Lucky for me, he missed his next swing and got his Morning Star stuck at the table. As he tried to pry it free, I planted my aching foot on it and hacked away, slicing into his arms and even giving him a nasty cut across the face. Meanwhile, Demos had turned his dagger backward and struck his new wife with the pommel, hoping to knock her out rather than deal a killing blow. His personal motives notwithstanding, it would be a good idea to extract some information out of her as to what the heck was going on. Reeling from the blow, she managed to get a hold of one of the vines and rip it loose. After a few moments, she was badly injured, but free. She kicked at Demos, who grabbed hold of her leg and pulled her back into his other hand, a ball of purple smoke forming in his palm, and he blew the smoke directly into her face. When it cleared, her eyes were hazy and she stopped thrashing. He released her leg. She just stood there, gazing listlessly at the chaos around her. He had charmed her, but it would only stop her from seeing him as an enemy. We only had a few minutes before she regained her senses. Taco severed the last hobgoblin's arm and turned to finally enter the room. Groll pulled his Morning Star free and swung it wildly, stopping just short of taking Valanthia's head when it impacted Taco's shield. Valanthia repaid the near miss with another burst of white flame. He dropped his weapon and screamed, beating wildly at the flames. Demos drew his dagger and had the nerve to say, "Watch this!" He kissed the blade and flung it right between my legs. Surprising literally everyone, his shot landed. The blade sunk into Groll's neck and he spat blood while trying to pull the dagger free. Thinking fast, Valanthia smacked it with her buckler and drove it so deep it was barely visible. The bugbear sputtered and died, toppling to the floor with a loud thud. Just then I heard a shrill cry and turned to see what had happened. Snarl had pinned Grell down and had bitten into his neck, tearing him open and dropping him to the floor. I roared and leapt from the table, sprinting after the wolf. I slashed wildly, blind with rage, while Valanthia rushed to Grell's side. She knelt down and placed her hands on him, closing her eyes and uttering a prayer. As she finished, soft golden light spread across his body and settled on his wound. Slowly but surely the flesh knitted back together and was all but gone. I drove my blades into Snarl and ripped them loose, gutting him like a pig and spilling his entrails onto the floor. Valanthia placed a hand on my shoulder to calm me, and I stopped to wipe the blood from my hands as it made holding my scimitars difficult. The drow, who had been nearly catatonic, perked right up when Groll was slain. She ran to the bed along the far wall and reached underneath. From it she pulled a small roll of paper and turned to flee. She knocked me down as she slammed into me and ran straight for Gundren. She was a blur, moving faster than any of us. She stood over him, cocked her leg, and slammed it down onto his head. A sickening crack resonated from his limp body, and he was gone. Demos slashed into her arm with his short sword and tried to follow up with another swing when she ducked under it, grabbing his wrist and flipping him onto his back. In a flash, she dove across the table and made for the door. Taco brought up her shield and they slammed into each other. It was a wasted effort, and Taco swung her arm back and flung the drow back into the room. Demos grabbed her arms and held her in place on the table. She kicked and flailed, and Taco grabbed hold of her legs to keep her steady. She nearly broke free when Demos finally backhanded her with his sword, knocking her out cold. We took a moment to compose ourselves while Taco dragged the bodies of the hobgoblins out of the hall and closed the door. After making sure Grell was all right, I drew a coil of rope from my bag and slid her down onto one of the chairs. I tied her tightly, leaving no slack for her to wiggle free. Given how she nearly got away after killing Gundren, I wasn't fond of that happening again. So that was r/DND stories, and if you have stories you'd like me to read, please feel free to contact me and submit.